2019 marked a year of protest, power shifts, and increasing international disputes. As tensions heighten with Iran after the U.S. assassination of top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, continuing disruption in the international order appears to be the new normal. Joining us now for a look at the countries they observed in 2019 and what they expect will play out across the globe in 2020, we welcome Ann Fitz-Gerald, director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs and professor of international security at Wilfrid Laurier University, and former Post-Media Foreign correspondent Matthew Fisher, now a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, once upon a time Canada's longest-serving foreign correspondent. It's great to have both of you here, you for your annual visit, and you for the first time. Lovely to have you here. Let's put you to work right away, Ann. The U.S. military kills this very prominent Iranian general. Iran responds with some attacks, nobody killed, thankfully, on the American side. Tell us this. What, in your view, has actually been achieved with this back and forth?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about it, Steve, that this guy was a bad guy, and he committed atrocities of all sorts in different parts of the world, conducted himself in a very inhuman way. So, yeah, interesting how things.
Departure.
No, and I don't think many people are, including a lot of Iranians as well. I think the counterattack was a bit surprising. I think we were gearing up for perhaps a collection of countermeasures, some coordinated, some convenient, some perhaps not even aimed at the United States. And so what we saw was, for me, slightly surprising.
In as much as it was proportional as opposed to an overreaction?
Yes, and the Iranian government was at pains to show how much it was abiding by international law, and I think thankfully they were getting some good advice on that area. But I will just say that I speculate that I could speculate that there was some dual-track communication going on between both governments.
So chest thumping in public, but then behind the scenes privately, some other stuff
agreement of
going
something
on.
Ceremonial.
I think that answer presupposes, Matthew, that this is essentially over. Do you think it is?
I absolutely do not think it's over. I know in the last 48 hours or 36 hours, there's been this great collective sigh of relief, and it is a good thing that that right now things have not taken off. But only 72 hours ago, the Iranian parliament, they were up and screaming death to America.
They have done that before.
They have done that before, famously, of course, during the hostage instance with the embassy back in the late 1970s.
40 years ago.
40 years ago, right now. 40 years ago right now. But there are other things still going on. There are some Iranian commanders who in the last 24 hours have demanded stronger action. On the American side, the Americans are still moving military assets into the region. They brought another 6 B-52 bombers to Diego Garcia as a sign yesterday of their will. They brought about 8,000 troops. And I don't think it's over. What I think is going to happen, though, is it's going to play out over a long time. And we won't maybe directly connect it to this. I think there will be greater risks for Israel from Hezbollah in the coming months. I think that there's a chance of terrorist attacks in Europe. I don't think any of that has really disappeared. But the Iranians, I think, did blink a little bit in the last day or two, because not only did the Americans finally make good on a threat that we've heard from so many American presidents, Trump finally did it, but also they could see the American military assets moving.
Well, when you see one side assassinate a high-profile person on the other side, and the other side respond by firing rockets, one could infer that there is a state of war in effect between these two countries. Would you see it that way?
Well, I think perceptions are everything at the moment, and I agree with Matthew that this isn't over yet. It could play out in a series of ways. I also think we might see some disintegration across the Iranian government as well.
Meaning what?
Well, some will want to see this harsh response that was touted followed through. Some very dark words were used at not only General Soleimani's funeral, but also from the Iranian foreign minister himself. And, to see such a disproportional response compared to those harsh words was, to me, a real indication that some dual-track communication had taken place.
But Hezbollah's been talking tougher. The Shia militias, al-Sadr has apparently said in Baghdad or in Sadr City, stand down a bit, but I've met those militias a number of times in Baghdad. They will not be happy, and they're not totally under the thumb of Tehran.
So this suggests that the proxies may take over the fight from here.
Well, yes, and there could be greater problems, of course, between the Sunnis and the Shias in Iraq. That government already is so precarious anyway. Anything can cause upheaval, and you get into what NATO might do or not do in Iraq. The Shias have a vote in a way there, and they sit on top of a lot of the oil wealth in Iraq. So there are a number of other actors, even beyond Iran, that are Shia, that will not be happy about this, because their great sponsor was Soleimani. I mean, he was everything to them.
And let's just understand this, though. Donald Trump came into power 3 years ago, pledging, among other things, to get America out of the entanglements in the Middle East and Afghanistan, and just to. In his view, America was far too overstretched, and he wanted some retrenchment on that front. He's now very much gotten America involved in a bellicose activity in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf. Any inconsistency here in your view?
Well, I think there's lots of inconsistencies going on at the moment, and with words and actions. I think let's be very clear: America has strategic interests still in the Middle East. I think Donald Trump has been very much speaking to his base, has one thing at the forefront of his mind, and that's getting reelected. So yes, it's a drawdown, but it's not an abandonment. I think the Americans quite understandably want European partners to stump up as well, especially post-NATO summit, where that was an issue under discussion. So I think, Steve, that it's a combination of a gradual drawdown, speaking to the base, but having this erratic form of communication that's leaving people very confused. I mean, talking about cultural heritage targets as one example,
that he would
where
bomb.
He's gone to pains to talk about the wonderful Iranian people and then the awful, corrupt and brutal regime, and that no longer draws a distinction between those two things when he talks about targeting cultural sites. Another, when somebody takes presidential national security decisions, you need the trust of the people, Congress, and also allies. And I think it's the conduct that people are concerned about, not so much the outcome of what's happened over the past 2 years.
And with the allies, we've not, there's no communication with the allies, and yet the first thing that the president does afterwards is says he wants more from the allies that 48 hours earlier were not worth even talking to.
Let's go up to 30,000 feet here for a second and take the microscope off Iran and look at the world writ large. As you look back at the events of 2019, can you give us a kind of a headline of what the big overarching trend in the world in terms of geopolitics was?
Well, I'd say chaotic and unpredictable, as usual. And as British historian A.J.P. Taylor said, the definition of history is about one darn thing after another. Yes. So I think what happened in 2019 was consistent with that definition of history.
It was one darn thing after another, wasn't it?
It was, and we have all these populist people movement. I don't think they're going to amount to much at the end of the day, but in the countries where these protests are taking place, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and in Asia, they're very important within these countries. I don't see it as achieving a whole lot, but that is one of the things that's unpredictable. We couldn't have, Venezuela and Hong Kong maybe you could have predicted, but many of the other demonstrations you could not have really foreseen. The American actions in Syria, too, quite aside from the Iran-Iraq equation, very odd, everything that went on there. America disengaging and then re-engaging, and we don't quite know where they're at now, but that provided an opening for Russia. And then, of course, China continues to
Hold off on China. I'm going to come back to China in a second. I wanted to pick up on your comments about But, there are many countries in the world today that are sort of moving more towards illiberal democracies, which is a very disappointing trend for those who believe in Western liberal-style democracies. And we happen to be speaking today from one of the very few liberal democracies in this world where there is not a very forceful populist movement champing at the bit to take over. And I guess I want to know from you, Ann, how much influence do you think this country has on the world stage today? Not power, but influence.
Well, I think if you draw a distinction between strategic level influence and influence at the functional level, then we do have influence at the latter level. I've just returned to Canada recently after working in all sorts of parts of the world for many years.
We should say, you're like abroad for 25 years or something, right?
Yeah.
And you've just come back a few months ago.
And delighted to be here.
And how are we playing out there?
Well, we're liked, and we do good things out there. And I always argue that the strength of my position and the equity in the work that I do there is based on the fact that I am Canadian, and I bring a Canadian approach, but I also bring a non-government approach as an academic as well. So I'm not seen to be wearing a cloak. But people always ask me about our immigration strategy, our ability as a country to manage federalism, something which others are really struggling with out there.
That's what we do here, though. What do they like about what we do out there?
Our diplomacy. And this is where I think we could improve more, because I think they'd like to hear more about what we do that's so successful, how we kept relative economic stability through globally economic tumultuous times. Our military is an institution that we should be terribly proud of here. It does wonderful things abroad. I worry sometimes that they're expected to do a lot more than be an enabler, which is what the military is all about.
Your friend beside you has a very famous quote, which is, "There is no country in the world that does less and says more than Canada." You standing by that this year again?
I absolutely stand by that. I would disagree with Ann about this quite strongly. I've spent 35 years abroad, and Canada, there's no question that Canada is liked. I mean, that is an absolute fact, indisputable. But I don't think we're terribly respected. I think we're regarded as nice guys. And Leo DeRocher, I know you like baseball, said nice guys finish last. And I don't say we're finishing last, but we're finishing.
What are we finishing last at these days?
But we're finishing in the middle. We're finishing in the middle. There is wonder at our immigration policy and how, until now, we've managed to take in very large numbers of people. It wasn't just the Liberals, the Conservatives before them. And in fact, if the Conservatives were elected again, it would be like that. But we don't have a foreign policy. We don't want to discuss foreign issues in Canada. The debate was canceled on foreign affairs. And my great concern,
the leaders'
debate, and my concern there was not only that the Prime Minister didn't want to talk about it, but that the opposition didn't even make a kerfuffle about it. I mean, they kind of confirmed the Prime Minister's position. And we don't want to say who we are, so we do things on an ad hoc basis, and I think we're kind of mushy. And I think push is coming to shove internationally in some of these things, for example, within NATO. And we do ask a tremendous amount of our military, given the size and the resources we put in, but there's no discussion of, for example, doubling, no consideration at all, of doubling the budget for the military. But to really have a say in the world, that counts a lot. And the good things that they do, they could do a lot more of. I mean, right now, we have something like 21 peacekeepers overseas, and we keep talking about what great peacekeepers we are.
Can I put that down, though? Okay, we're liked. Are we respected around the world?
On the peacekeeping issue, I think we need to change the vernacular on peacekeeping. I think we don't see peacekeeping around the world anymore. It was a concept that was based on truce-keeping in a very, very different global time. But Canada played a real role in conceptualizing that debate and to shape and inform it. And I think it can shape and inform the next generation of peacekeeping as well. But I work in places like Somalia and northeast Nigeria and Ukraine and areas where
No peace to
there's
keep.
no peace to keep, and it's characterized by counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, warfare. And so, we have to look at our capability here in Canada, and where I would agree with Matthew is that, we need to make an investment.
It's been a decade that we've been really in a situation where it's peace making rather than peacekeeping. Canada has not kept up. The schools, even in the schools, in the high schools in this country, they still teach traditional peacekeeping, and so we wrap ourselves in that blue flag because of things that we did 40 or 50 years ago. But it's getting a bit old. And the reality is we can do an effective job. I was in Mali this year, and we had a very effective mission. The problem was the UN didn't give them much to do, but it took the Canadian government over 2 years to even decide to send a small contingent to Mali. And then, of course, they were there only 13 months before they're gone.
Before the clock gets away from us here, I do want us to look east. And you were here a year ago, and we talked about what your forecast was for the eastern part of this globe a year ago. Remember what you had to say? You don't have to remember what you had to say, because we happen to have it here. Go ahead, Sheldon.
It will be some kind of standoff in Asia in the next year that could involve the Japanese and the China.
Come on, that's too much
A standoff
space.
in Asia between
China and its neighbors or the United States, and it could be over those islands.
That could go military.
Yes, whether it's in the next 12 months or 24 or 36 months, it is coming like a freight train, and I think we are unwise to not think about that.
Has the freight train come yet?
It's coming.
Still coming.
Vietnam has very significant disputes over platforms, gas and oil platforms in the South China Sea. The Indonesians, for the first time ever, and just in the past few weeks, have put their navy to sea because their territorial waters have been invaded by Coast Guard vessels from China. China built 23 warships and put them to sea in the last 12 months. We know in Canada it takes us 20 or 25 years to build one. These are not the actions of a power that is not interested in exerting influence over a region. More incursions into Japanese airspace. The Philippine government is now wavering more, and I fear that there will be miscalculations at sea. I was on the Canadian warship that was trailed for 4,000 nautical miles in the South China and East China Sea and through the Strait of Taiwan in June. And I was 2 years ago on the Winnipeg, last year on the Regina, and the difference even in that 12 months, the Chinese now don't follow from 5 miles away, nautical miles, they follow 1 mile away. For the first time ever, they sent fighter jets down and buzzed the Canadians. It's all slowly ratcheting up, and I can't predict when it's going to come to a head, and it's not going to be a global war or anything like that anytime soon, but there are going to be increasing tensions in Asia. There already are, and it's moving into the Indian Ocean. And don't forget that just in the 2 weeks ago, the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese were holding joint naval exercises in the Gulf of Oman and in the northern Indian Ocean. And for us in the West, if you look at those three countries together at sea, it's kind of a sinister trio.
Okay, clearly they want to have influence on the world stage. Do you see the Chinese as a military threat?
I don't see their leading global priority as military expansionism. I think they want to exert a leading military presence in the region, but I think they want to be the most influential country in the world, but through a very communist-driven economic model, and one which sees them all over. And I see this in East and West Africa, especially, where the Chinese government comes in. They offer to build road, rail, et cetera, infrastructure like the Belt and Road Initiative, that these countries have never absorbed before, but desperately need, can't afford any fraction of it. And China very cannily says, well, look, it's okay, you don't have to pay us. We'll be here for the next 100 years. We will own the toll booths on the road. We will own the offices at the port authorities and the airports, collect the tariffs over the years and the fees, and that's how you'll pay us back. That buys them control, that buys them authority, political voice, and of course, things like infrastructure, like airports and seaports, are all instrumental not just for international trade, but also military mobilization. So slowly, this economic security influence is being dubbed with military expansionism.
But you don't infer that that's necessarily equal to a military threat.
Absolutely not.
Correct. Okay. Let me read from Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, then I'll get you to comment on this. Here's the French president in a year-end interview with The Economist magazine. The great difficulty, he says, is that we are witnessing a sort of backlash, the return of other competing values, non-democratic models which are challenging European humanism like never before. I've often said that our model was built in the 18th century with the European Enlightenment, the market economy, individual freedom, democratic rule, and the progress of the middle class. The Chinese model is a model that brings together a market economy and an expanding middle class, but without freedom. Some people say it works, so there's some kind of living proof. I don't know whether it's sustainable. People say, well, I'm willing to give up certain freedoms to move towards a more authoritarian regime if it protects me more and allows for growth and greater wealth. The crisis is right here among us. Okay, Matthew, how much traction does this authoritarian model of governance, or I guess trending other places in Eastern Europe, illiberal democracy, how much does it have right now?
I think Macron is very sensible in identifying these as a problem. China and Russia are both sort of poster boys for you can do well and your people will buy it. And I think in Russia and in China, the people have bought it. And so far in Eastern Europe, they have. I mean, we see this a bit in Poland. We certainly see it in Hungary and Slovakia. But when you go to Africa, when I speak to Africans, and I traveled a lot in Africa in the last year, the Chinese are everywhere and with fantastic investments. Some of them kind of silly, like 80,000 seat sports stadiums, but some of them with great functional benefits to the countries they're in. But the public they don't see that because all the jobs are for Chinese workers. The Chinese workers are basically fenced off from the population, and there's growing resentment, there's backlash. We're not at that point in Europe, but populism in Europe, maybe the influence is greater with Putin than it is with the Chinese, but they see tough guys, and some of their leaders like to think they're going to be tough guys too. And right now, I wouldn't say they're winning, but incrementally, they're making progress, even in countries such as Sweden and Denmark.
Let me ask Ann about that. How concerned are you that authoritarianism or illiberal democracy are gaining greater traction in the world?
Well, it's all about the tension between these two models, right? But there are two very important issues here. First of all, the characteristics surrounding that Chinese and Asian tiger model are one, strong leadership, two, the availability of a livable income and international financing, and three, a good national strategy. So in a lot of divided societies in the developing world, you don't have these things. And also, the big difference is it's a relatively homogeneous society, which this economic model takes root in. With these very diverse societies, people want the democratic assurance and the guarantee. So some countries that have been turning to China and Asian, Eastern models to, and who have expired with these Western liberal peace paradigm models, are now looking for answers to some sort of amalgam model that bridges the good things of both together. And we're a bit stuck.
Let's spend a moment just looking at the not-so-united kingdom right now. Boris Johnson did win a terrific election victory for his Conservative Party. Brexit is going to happen now. If you looked into your crystal ball, 25 years from now, Ann, what do you see the European Union looking like, given the relationship that the UK now wants to have with it?
Crystal ball gazing, dangerous because it's about the future. But I think European Union will have to sort of redefine itself. And it can't define itself as a power and compete as a power. But it can do things over the next 25 years to sort of make the union a little bit more cohesive. But there's a lot of work still to do, and introduce some financial disciplines and fiscal policies to avoid the sort of banking crisis, the financial crises that almost brought Italy and Greece down. I think there's still a lot of confusion that reigns over what post-Brexit looks like. What does it mean? What does it mean for Canada? What does it mean for Canada's relationship with both the European Union and the United Kingdom? There are opportunities, but there are also some big uncertainties. In 25 years, well, I think, you know, we're going to see it still together, but I think it's going to be a looser constellation of opt-in, opt-out options.
I think one of the keys here is what happens with Germany post-Merkel. The German economy, nobody's really paid that much attention to it that I can see other than the very narrow sort of financial press, but the German economy is going much more slowly. It's really not growing at all, and there are all these uncertainties. She was sort of a rock for us. We could depend on her. Well, what happens afterwards? And Germany controls so much. We talk about Britain leaving Brexit, and that's an important piece of it. But what will Germany do when even more of the bills are going to fall to them, and maybe they don't have the wherewithal to pay for them? That is where I think things can unravel further, because Southern Europe, for all that the Greeks and the Italians bitch, and they really do complain a tremendous amount about the Germans, and you know, they run these mock sort of Nazi-like things in their tabloids about how Germany is trying to force them to do things. The reality is those southern economies are completely dependent on German handouts. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but it's a reality. What if Germany cannot be the big brother to so many people? In that vacuum, Russia, with all its oil and gas money, maybe can make greater inroads.
I want to ask you about how well you think Vladimir Putin prosecuted his international affairs agenda over the past 12 months.
Well, I think all eyes are on Putin at the moment, and you know, the extent to which he will continue to play a role in the destabilization in Ukraine and in Syria.
And in the United States?
Possibly. I think we have to be pleased with the whole prisoner exchange that took place just before Christmas. I think we have to be pleased with the fact that Zelensky is taking a bit of a different approach in Ukraine and has lots of support behind him. But I think we have to be very concerned, especially with what's just happened over the past 2 weeks and Russia's perspective on those events, with how will they go forward vis-a-vis the Minsk agreements and also the Normandy process.
Yeah, you better take 30 seconds and explain what the Minsk agreements and the Normandy process are.
I mean, it's shaping and informing some sort of resolution in the Donbass area in Ukraine.
Matthew.
And we're a long way from a solution there, and I'm very worried that the solution, I'm not as big a fan of the prisoner exchange because it seems to me it favored Russia. And incrementally, Russia is gaining what it wanted all the time, which is de facto recognition of the seizure or the annexation of Crimea, and also the status quo in Donbass, where they don't control huge amounts of territory, the Russian proxies, but in 2 places they do. And once that stabilizes, I worry that then Russia will look for other adventures. Trump may have gained because of his problems with impeachment by his action against Iran. Well, Putin also gains. His personal popularity at home in the last year or 2 has gone up and down a little bit, and maybe he needs another adventure.
Let's take, we have a minute left, let's take 30 seconds to each of you. And on the chance that we're going to have you two back 12 months from now and want to replay these predictions that you make, give us a prediction for 2020. What do you see?
2020, Trump gets reelected. A very confused and chaotic situation concerning post-Brexit EU, and I would say the almost near total loss of privacy as a result of Siri, Alexa, and photo imagery recognition. So I would also add the digitalized economy will move faster than we have the macroeconomic instruments, the legal frameworks, and the governance frameworks to absorb.
I think there will be more frictions in Asia. I think we're going to see a lot more things that you cannot predict, but in the Middle East. And it's not just in the traditional way. I think the Saudis may have a go somehow at the Iranians or vice versa. And Yemen is always out there. It's a horrible war that nobody knows much about, and that definitely is a war that pits Sunnis against Shias. It's a war that pits Saudi Arabia and its money against Iran and its money, and we are on the Western side, not Canada, but certainly the United States has supported the Saudis in this, so has Israel.
That's Around the World in 30 Minutes from Ann Fitz-Gerald from the Balsillie School of International Affairs and Matthew Fisher from Canadian Global Affairs Institute.
Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.